trained as a physician. I wasn't trained as an anthropologist, and I took ecology in college. But when you look at like what we know about the timeline of life on Earth, 500 plus million years of plant and animal coevolution. And there's a lot of people who have speculated this, that essentially plants evolve, animals evolve, animals start eating plants, plants evolve defenses, animals evolve defenses against the defenses. And there's a whole series of enzymatic systems in our liver, the phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification systems. They're called cytochrome P450 and other reactionary systems in our liver that are meant to detoxify things. And a lot of people speculate, and I think this is really reasonable, that the majority of the reason we have those is so that we could eat plants from time to time so we didn't starve during our evolution. But there's a real interesting interaction here. This is warfare. This is an arms race that's 400 million years old between plants and animals. And so what was so interesting for me as I got deeper and deeper into this idea around, can humans exist? Should humans exist? Will humans thrive on a completely animal-based diet? You start to realize, wait a minute, why are we imagining that plants are benign? They're beautiful, they're fun to look at, but they are rooted in the ground. They can't run away from us. What's their defense? Well, if you're out in the desert, a cacti's got a thorn, or a rose has a thorn, a spine. But most of them just have plant defense chemicals, and that's not even conjecture. It's just known botanical science that plants make chemicals, broadly called phytoalexins, that are meant to dissuade animals, insects, fungi from over-consuming them. And so my fear is that we've assumed that plants are good for us. And we see everything with these plant compounds through the lens of, these are good for us. How can we prove they're good for us? There's a whole different part of the story. What if we think about it from a plant's perspective? What if these plant chemicals are not good for us? And we're misinterpreting the research, and I can talk about why I think we are. And maybe the plants are just making these chemicals to say, hey, if you eat a lot of me, you're not going to feel good. I'm going to affect your thyroid. I'm going to affect your androgens, your sex hormones, or whatever. I'm going to make you have diarrhea or nausea, or I'm going to kill you. And we've just been thinking more plants, more plants, more plants, when it's like, wait a minute, why are we eating plants in the first place?
Hey everybody, this is Kevin Bass from thedietwars.com. I'm a medical student and a PhD student at the tail end of my degrees, interested in nutrition, health, longevity, plants, and misinformation. In this video, we're going to be covering a bit of misinformation from Paul Saladino, as reported on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Paul's argument is actually not his argument originally. It was present a long time back. The first time I encountered it was in Mark Sisson, but no doubt it goes back even further. This argument is that plants, because they can't run away or fight, produce chemical defenses. That whenever animals eat the plants, they become essentially poisoned by the plants. Therefore, essentially, humans and animals, I guess, shouldn't eat plants. Although there is a kind of arms race between plants and animals, whereby humans can detoxify plants via the liver. That is one of the main functions of the liver, to detoxify toxic things. It still may not be such a good idea to eat plants. In this video, I'm going to be introducing 5 arguments against this idea, essentially to show that it is incorrect, it's false, it's nonsensical, in fact, once you fully spell out its implications and understand the structure of it. I'm going to be first introducing some of the weaker arguments, but these will actually provide some context and some deeper understanding of why this argument on the behalf of Paul is ridiculous. And then I'm going to provide what I think is the conclusive argument, an argument that I have come up with. It's not rocket science. It's kind of an easy thing to come up with, but it's I think an argument that fully exposes the ridiculousness of this argument that plants, because they have these defenses, we should avoid eating them. The first argument is that, yes, it's true that plants do have defense compounds and defense chemicals that do poison the animals that try to eat them. And one great example of this is the almond, which in the wild form can kill you if you eat too much of it. It can be quite a bitter nut. Wild almonds can. I believe it's cyanide that kills you. Let's double check this. Sorry, it's amygdalin, which breaks down to benzaldehyde and cyanide. So it contains a compound that breaks down to cyanide. It's true, yes, this wild almonds do contain this, but the obvious answer to that is that domesticated almonds don't. Human beings figured out how to detoxify almonds and produced domesticated almonds. Maybe one of the ways in which that was done was humans found the less bitter almonds and bred those, and then took the less bitter almonds from the offspring of those almonds and bred those, so we get almonds as they exist today. And if anybody's ever had raw almonds, you'll note that occasionally you can find one that's quite bitter. It contains some of its evolutionary heritage as being poisonous. Not the full extent of that breeding out of that trait hasn't been achieved. There's still some residue of some of that trait, even in domesticated almonds. But importantly, we did breed out that trait through the process of domestication. A parallel in the animal kingdom would be the domestication of all sorts of different animals to make them more harmless and easier to manage. In the same way we've done that to plants. We wouldn't want to have a wild, many sorts of wild animals that haven't yet been fully domesticated yet. If you have them, say 10,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago, you had a wild boar. That wild boar wasn't as easily manageable as modern pigs are today. In the same way, almonds from 15,000 years ago are not as easily manageable. They're more likely to cause harm than almonds today. And we know this across a number of species. And if any of you have ever foraged for wild greens, you'll know that wild greens tend to be much more bitter than their grocery bought counterparts. And that is because of the defense chemicals in wild greens. Here's an interesting paper documenting that scientifically and quantitatively, called Plant Domestication Decreases Both Constitutive and Induced Chemical Defenses by Direct Selection Against Defensive Traits. It was published in Scientific Reports, which is a Nature family journal. And it documents that among domesticated varieties of cabbage, the level concentration of defense chemicals is much lower than in the wild varieties. Essentially, plants have undergone the same domestication process as animals have. We no longer take wolves around as pets, although some people might. It's not such a great idea to have a wolf as a pet. And we know that by watching the Disney movie White Fang. I'm just kidding. But that's really what happens. Like in White Fang, I'm not just kidding. It is really what happens. And like White Fang, like they had the half wolf, half dog. Those animals are less predictable and less easy to manage than a straight up domesticated dog, right? So We've done the same thing to animals as we did to plants, and so these plants are much more easy to manage and much less toxic and much less burdensome and healthier thereby than their wild counterparts, right? One of the arguments is that in the plant kingdom, only a certain number of plants are actually edible, a small proportion of them, whereas in the animal kingdom, you can eat everything. Well, that's not true either. Among hunters, they specialize in certain species of animals, not just one species of animal, because most species of animals are like not worth the risk. They're not worth the trouble. You're not going to go hunting for a lion. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you're not going to go to a lion troop and try to hunt a lion troop. It's not going to be a good risk-reward thing, because that lion troop could give you a bunch of trouble. It could kill you. You're going to go for like herd animals or other easier to hunt animals, and not for lions. So it's the same thing. You're going to go for the easier animals to go after. Same thing with the plants. You're going to go after the easier plants to go after. And then when we domesticate through coevolution, in part, we breed plants that are even more docile, and we breed animals that are more docile. So the argument is that domestication undermines the argument of Paul, the argument as it were, because it's a silly argument, as we're going to point out further. The second thing is animal poisons. Just because there are plant poisons doesn't mean that there's not animal poisons. Animals also produce poisons as defenses, right? There's dozens of species that are poisonous. And then there's about 200,000 species that are venomous. So they'll bite you and envenomate you. But there are animals that are passively poisonous. There's birds, there's fish, there's snakes, frogs, toads. Everybody's aware of the frogs and the toads. There's salamanders, cephalopods, meaning the octopus, a lot of insects. There's a large number of animals that are poisonous. Now, why wouldn't we expect, therefore, for there to be lesser poisons, poisons that aren't quite as bad as the really bad poisons? And there might be. And there might be. So why do we eat necessarily animal flesh? Because animal flesh can have poisons in it too, or toxic compounds in it too that have evolved to undermine human health. Why would we be worried about that? The next argument I'm going to point out is probably the most important argument before I segue into the two final arguments. So this is the Reductio ad absurdum. This is an easy one. So let's say it's right that Paul believes that no animal should eat plants because plants are poisonous, right? According to Paul. Therefore, does he advocate a carnivore diet to frugivorous birds, towards herbivorous birds that don't ever eat any meat whatsoever? Rabbits, should rabbits eat a carnivore diet, a steak-only diet? Should antelope? Should hamsters eat a carnivore diet? Guinea pigs? Should all animals only eat a carnivore diet and no animals ever eat plants? Would that optimize animal health? Should turtles eat an all-beef diet? Right? Because you don't want the turtle eating a plant, it's going to be toxic. So you want the turtle eating an all-beef diet, a carnivore diet, to optimize its health, right? Optimize the turtle's health, you want to give an all-meat diet. Only meat to your pet turtle. Now, what's going to happen if you do that? Your pet turtle's going to start growing deformities, right? Its shell's going to get deformed. It's going to start having skeletal deformities, and eventually it's going to die. Right? It's going to happen for a lot of herbivorous animals. They're going to get diseases and die from eating a carnivorous diet. Well, okay, but wait a second. Like, I thought, according to the argument, that if you're an animal, you don't want toxic plants. Plants are going to kill you. But now you're saying, Kevin, you want to eat plants. Plants aren't going to kill you. Which is it? Well, if you're an herbivore, if you're adapted to eat a large number of plants, yeah, plants might have toxins, but you've learned how to detoxify them, and that's what you thrive on evolutionarily. That's what your genetics and biology is built for, to thrive on plants. But wait a second, why can't we just take the argument that plants are toxic and just tell the turtle to eat meat? The turtle wasn't evolved for that. The turtle was evolved to eat plants, even though they're toxic. It's evolved to eat plants. Okay, so you can't, without additional information, take this idea that plants have toxins and derive from it the idea that you should have carnivory. You can't. You have to actually look at the genetic heritage, the evolutionary heritage, and the health effects of plants on those animals. And in this particular case, on humans. We can't know simply by knowing that plants have toxins that humans therefore must not eat plants or must eat fewer plants. We can't know that. What's going to be the response in terms of human health to eating only meat? Is it going to be good or bad, like the turtle or like the rabbit? Is it going to be good or bad? Rabbits will get atherosclerosis. They'll get heart disease real fast, and many herbivorous animals will get heart disease really fast by eating a lot of meat. Are humans the same? Or are we better off if we eat a lot of meat? Which is it? It's an interesting argument because it shows that you actually have to look at the evidence and you can't just derive through some sort of argument that plants are poisonous, therefore only eat animals. You can't, that's a meaningless argument. You actually have to look at the evidence. One of the things that Paul says, and we're getting to the fourth argument now, is that plants introduce toxins that undermine the health of animals, but this might not necessarily be true. Let's say, even in the worst case, they do have toxins that humans can't detoxify. Plants do have toxins that animals can't detoxify. Is that always necessarily bad? We know that in many cases, for many medicines, some of which you can take for a very long period of time, that these are actually healthy. They are plant toxins that have biological effects in humans that actually produce health. Right? Undermining certain functions of human biology or mammalian biology in general sometimes produces health. Let's take a great example of this. There's this article published in 2019. It's called the NLRP3 inflammasome suppression improves longevity and prevents cardiac aging in male mice. You knock out an inflammatory gene in mice, you knock it out, you prevent it from functioning, and the mice live longer. Why? Why is it undermining the function of the mice, causing it to live longer? Well, the reason is that functionality in mice served the purpose in the past of protecting the mouse against a pathogen, an infectious disease. But in the present, when there's fewer infectious diseases that are going to try to kill the mouse, it actually has a negative long-term effect if you look at the longevity of the mouse. So evolution wasn't selecting for longevity. It was selecting for, okay, immediate survival, prevent the infection, have a higher rate of inflammation, protect the organism, but then undermine longevity. But that's not such a big deal because we don't care about it. Evolution doesn't care if the mouse lives to be 3 years or 2 years. It just wants it to live for a couple years and then reproduce and then die. That's all evolution cares about. So if you knock out that inflammatory gene in an environment where you don't need it, the mice live longer. In the same way, you can undermine certain cellular processes and biological processes in humans and then cause life extension. That's even assuming that these things are toxic in the first place, right? And that segues to the final argument, which is the empirical argument. We know for sure, based on the latest evidence, randomized controlled trial, gold standard randomized controlled trial literature that Paul exhorts, we know for sure that plant alkaloids, in particular cocoa flavanols, we know that they reduce cardiovascular disease risk. Cocoa makes people live longer because it interferes with normal biological processes in such a way as to promote longevity. And in this particular trial, it's called Cosmos. It contained 21,000 participants randomized into two groups, one to receive a sugar pill and the other to receive cocoa flavanols. And you got a reduction in cardiovascular disease events and deaths. And an increase in all-cause mortality, so a decrease in all-cause mortality and an increase in the lifespan of the participants as a result of taking these so-called poisons. So empirically, if we look at the actual data itself, we can say with certainty that these alkaloids, these so-called toxins, which are in this bean, it's a bean, by the way, it's not meant to be eaten by anything. These are definitely toxins. These are definitely there to ward off predators, et cetera, which is also where caffeine comes from, the feel-good effects of cocoa come from. It's a drug, right? It feels good. It's supposed to be a poison, but it feels good and we like to take it, and then it also helps our health. It's kind of wild. This drug, which is originally a poison, actually ends up helping our health. And we've determined that. And if we take it every single day, it can prevent heart attacks and death. So we know it empirically that this argument of Paul's is wrong. We know it through sophisticated arguments, not really that sophisticated, but we know it through arguments that show that his way of arguing is going to lead to absurdity. It's going to lead to recommending a carnivore diet for your pet turtle, which is going to kill your pet turtle. It leads to absurdity. So it can't be right, or you need more nuance. You need to actually understand empirically. You can't just understand straight from the argument that we shouldn't eat any plants because they have toxins. You can't just say that and then just say, okay, therefore we should not eat plants, we should only eat animals. You can't do that. And then empirically, not only is like the conceptual argument clearly wrong conceptually, but it's wrong empirically. If you look at actual plant toxins, quote unquote plant toxins, they're healthful. But what is the takeaway? So there might actually be, it's important to point out, there might actually be some harm from over-ingesting certain plant compounds, certain plant chemicals, certain excess amounts of kale, for example. You don't want to eat like a massive amount of kale with every meal, right? So you should get a variety of different plants in your diet so your body can handle them, but also get the nutrition from them that your body needs, because we are an omnivore. And we've evolved, just like turtles, to get some of our nutrition every day from plants. Just like rabbits, we're an omnivore. And those animals are not omnivores, by the way, those are herbivores, but we are omnivores and we are meant to get some of our nutrition from these plants. So we should get a wide variety, and we should get domesticated ones. Don't pick them out. Don't pick wild greens. Don't pick up your local foraging book. I have like 3 foraging books because I got really into this for a while. Don't go foraging too much. A little bit's okay. There's other reasons you don't want heavy metals in your foods. There's a whole bunch of other reasons, but eat domesticated foods and eat a wide variety of them. And the body's built for that. Now, there could be some genetic differences between people, such that some people are uniquely susceptible to plant foods in such a way that they're going to have worse health outcomes if they eat plant foods, potentially. And if you feel that you're one of those people, be that person and be careful, right? But most people who claim to be that kind of person is not that kind of person. We saw that with Michaela Peterson. She used to say she could only live on a carnivore diet, but then she slowly backed off. She learned that that wasn't true. And a lot of people end up learning that that's not true. There's so many mental effects that play into this that we've talked about in other videos. But yeah, check out this trial from Cosmos. Check out my video on Cosmos called Eat Chocolate, Stop Heart Attacks. It was about Cosmos, the trial where it showed flavanols are actually protective and help with heart disease. And then check out, there is a big debunking by Lane Norton. I had a small role in that. I was very busy with my PhD at the time, so I couldn't contribute as much as I would want it to. But I talk about the HODS extensively in that article that he has on Paul Saladino's claims. Me and him co-wrote it. He did the bulk of it. I think he also had part of his team help him as well. That's a killer article about Paul Saladino's claims on the Joe Rogan podcast. And then check out Alex Leaf's debate. It's another friend of mine where he debates Paul, and he tries to be really nice, but then he systematically, over the course of the debate, dismantles Paul's claims. Shows that they're quite fatuous. There was actually supposed to be a part 2 of the debate, but Paul backed out after the part 1, and he stopped responding to emails, as I understand. Nobody told me that. Maybe I've heard that. So, I don't think anybody's going to care. Yeah, because Paul doesn't like to be shown to be like silly, and he is sometimes. So, yeah, so check out those 2 sources as well, and think about some of these arguments, because it's a silly argument that Paul's putting forward. And part of the reason I made this video is because Joe Rogan actually talked about it in like a podcast, I don't know, a couple months ago. He wanted to hear good counter arguments against Paul's idea that, plants are defenseless, they're rooted in the ground, they can't run away, they can't fight. Doesn't that mean we should be a carnivore? And I made this video in part to persuade Joe that it's a silly argument. And therefore, I'm going to actually send this to Joe, and hopefully he listens and clicks it, because it's important for him to understand. Like, people think about this a lot. It's important to understand what the actual arguments are. Okay, if you like this video, if you like what I'm doing, please like it, subscribe to my podcast. It's a great podcast, in my humble opinion. Also, leave a comment on YouTube. It'll help the algorithm. If anything, just like write algorithm in the comment section. And that's what a lot of people are doing now. I'm just getting like spammed with people writing algo. Thank you. That's like super awesome. So just, if you have nothing to say and you want to help me out, spam algo in the comments. You can also find me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram at KevinNBass, KevinnBass. You can find me on Patreon at the same, KevinnBass. Please sign up to my Patreon. $5 a month, $20 a month would be even better. And then of course $100 a month would be great if you have the money to spare, because that would be very helpful. If you are a patron, I'm getting flooded by comments these days. So if you are a patron, tell me that you're a patron in DMs and say, I'm a patron. I want you to answer my question. And it's going to be easier for me to get around to your question. If you want consultations, send me a message. We can do consultations as well. So I'm doing a lot lately. People are requesting that from me so that I can help them to understand the literature at a deeper level. I'm not a doctor, I'm a medical student, but I can help you to understand what the literature says and think about it for your own particular health needs. All that stuff would be great. And then, of course, subscribe to the podcast. As I mentioned, rate and review it as well. The more ratings, the better. The more reviews, the better. Please leave feedback. Let me know what I can do better. I'm constantly working on that. Truly, constantly working hard on it. Because, I can always get better and I can always improve and make a better podcast. And that's what I'm working on right now. So your comments will help that to happen. Cool. So again, share this, and then I'll see you guys for the next podcast. Peace.
I was trained as a physician. I wasn't trained as an anthropologist, and I took ecology in college. But when you look at what we know about the timeline of life on Earth, 500 plus million years of plant and animal coevolution, and there's a lot of people who have speculated this, that essentially plants evolve, animals evolve, animals start eating plants, plants evolve defenses, animals evolve defenses against the defenses, and there's a whole series of enzymatic systems in our liver, the phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification systems. They're called cytochrome P450 and other reactionary systems in our liver that are meant to detoxify things. And a lot of people speculate, and I think this is really reasonable, that the majority of the reason we have those is so that we could eat plants from time to time so we didn't starve during our evolution. But there's a real interesting interaction here. This is warfare. This is an arms race that's 400 million years old between plants and animals. And so what was so interesting for me as I got deeper and deeper into this idea around, can humans exist? Should humans exist? Will humans thrive on a completely animal-based diet? You start to realize, wait a minute, why are we imagining that plants are benign? They're beautiful, they're fun to look at, but they are rooted in the ground. They can't run away from us. What's their defense? Well, if you're out in the desert, a cacti's got a thorn, or a rose has a thorn, a spine. But most of them just have plant defense chemicals, and that's not even conjecture. That's just known botanical science that plants make chemicals, broadly called phytoalexins, that are meant to dissuade animals, insects, fungi from over-consuming them. And so my fear is that we've assumed that plants are good for us. And we see everything with these plant compounds through the lens of, these are good for us. How can we prove they're good for us? There's a whole different part of the story. What if we think about it from a plant's perspective? What if these plant chemicals are not good for us? And we're misinterpreting the research, and I can talk about why I think we are. And maybe the plants are just making these chemicals to say, hey, if you eat a lot of me, you're not going to feel good. I'm going to affect your thyroid. I'm going to affect your androgens, your sex hormones, or whatever. I'm going to make you have diarrhea or nausea, or I'm going to kill you. And we've just been thinking more plants, more plants, more plants, when it's like, wait a minute, why are we eating plants in the first place?